Hello, welcome to RetroWiki'd's live stream. I hope you'll find it interesting, and I'm waiting to see you and share the thoughts I have with you, as well as seeing what you are interested in. I hope you will enjoy it. Well, first of all, there are many very interesting things I would like to share with you, particularly regarding the channel. There have been many videos I had in mind, and still there are a lot that I would like to still present. Most of them will be on the typical subjects you know all too well, meaning retro laptops, multimeters, other old technology equipment, and as well some newer products and reviews that you may find interesting. It's almost a year since I started making videos, and I hope some of them have been very interesting to you. In particular, you may remember, or some of you may remember, the classical DOS videos I made the first time during December, and I think they were very interesting, and they placed the channel quite strongly on the path we see today. Even if there aren't many subscribers, and even if I haven't made what I intended initially, I think that the channel is on a good path, and I hope you will be along this path. So, since I don't see too much activity over here, and I wasn't expecting particularly a lot, I will be presenting some of my ideas I have. So, the first one will be about all the equipment. I think that all the TV sets and other devices are very interesting, and if you look at yes, unfortunately it's not going to be overly clear. You may notice a schematic over here. It's one classical schematic for a TV set that used vacuum tubes, and there are more that I will share with you. And of course, even if I wasn't a TV repairman, I had a lot of experience with older TV sets, and some of them had quite interesting behaviors, particularly due to the way in which they were built. And of course, when we are having the joy of seeing so many devices today, we may not be particularly in the know regarding all the equipment. And I think that this part may be interesting to some of you. Also, there are other very interesting aspects I would like to think about, and some of them pertain to, of course, the struggles of running DOS or using older equipment. And this is again a very interesting one, because most of the equipment you see today is quite predictable. But when you're using older equipment, you have to take into account various aspects, and it's not particularly easy to do so. The first thing you will encounter with all the equipment is the fact that it may not be fully working. And one of the most common causes of failures is a disk drive that may go bad, and this means that either the device would not boot even if a system was installed, or the hard drive could not operate at all. which would mean that even if you were to attempt installing an operating system, it would have issues. And of course, there are aspects that you may have a simple solution to, and others that are much more difficult to tackle. It's much easier to have a working disk drive, but working disk drives can be deceiving because sometimes the hard drive may start right when you power on the laptop or your desktop computer, and then the hard drive may not work properly the next time. So it's going to be quite difficult when you have to take into account all these aspects. And sometimes you would have to purchase another hard drive, and at other times you would have to think about replacement. In general, I think that replacements are quite difficult, at least at this point in time, because, of course, the market is quite shrinking for older devices. There are only very few old stock hard drives that are still in good conditions. And many times, some hard drives are notorious for problems. I have made a video on the channel where I presented 3 hard drives, all 3 of them having certain issues. And even if you may attempt to save or repair them, keep in mind that they do have some failure modes, and it's quite difficult to cope with them. In my experience, the most difficult hard drive to work with may not be particularly the oldest ones, but ones that were built somewhere between 1996 and early 2000s, probably 2000, 2001, because with older hard drives, such as this model, it's quite easy to find a solution, because most of the time when you have to attempt at making the drive operational, you would have to unscrew 2 parts to, let's say, unscrew the cover, and then you would get to the inside and you could unstick the head assembly, which would not damage the disk, because the tendency of this particular set of disk drives is not to fail spectacularly, but to have a problem of the head assembly sticking to the parking position. And this means that the head assembly is free to go as soon as an additional force is being applied on the head, so that they can move freely again. They can take the necessary angle to read the data. And this is a very simple to apply solution. You don't need to be overly careful to various things, and it seems to work every time. And even if the drive tends to stick at another time, the tendency is somewhat lower if the drive is cycled on and off. However, there are drives that simply go bad, and in that case, there is nothing much to do. But for this generation of these drives, the solution is very simple. Of course, you need dedicated screws, dedicated screwdrivers, because the screws are not your typical Phillips head screw. So you have to keep that in mind. I think there are some recessed torque screw, yes, torque screw head. So you have to think about that. And that's a fortunate situation, because you don't need to work too much in order to save such a disk drive. If you want to know what it says on the label, because it may not be entirely obvious on the camera, It's an 814 megabyte disk drive capacity. It's an MK 1926 FCD. It's a typical laptop hard drive disk drive, one that is slightly taller than the newer generation of hard drives. It works generally on early Pentiums. Yes, I think early Pentium 1s and Pentium, not necessarily MMX. Pentium 1 processors at around 60 to 100 megahertz. This is a typical disk drive you may find in laptops from around 1995, 1996. There were larger capacity ones, up to 2 gigabytes, I think, and they all had the same failure mode in the sense that the actuator may get stuck to the parking position. And as I said, it's quite easy to solve the issue. As you may have seen over here, there are just 2 screws that have to be punched through the labels. So you have to be careful not to damage the the metal, but it's quite possible to have a successful repair. And then to carefully pry open from the edges the top part of the hard drive. And if you successfully disassembled the hard drive, you will clearly see the actuator that I think is in this position, and you just have to apply some slight force without bending the arm, just to unstick it from that position. You may even do so when the hard drive starts operation, just to help it and apply minimum force. I do not recommend this remedy to be applied with a screwdriver. It's better to use your fingers because you have much better control and you don't risk applying too much force. So I think this one works better. And then, of course, apply all the screws. Keep in mind that when you assemble back a hard disk drive, it's better to screw the threads in opposite directions and then get to the ones that are on the edges and have not been covered by them. Because if you are going to place the force diagonally, it's going to be applied much more balanced than you would otherwise. So keep that in mind. This is a very simple repair and one that works generally well. I have seen few hard drives that have surface degradation, but this can happen. However, keep in mind that it's not impossible to make such a hard disk drive operational, and you should be aware of that. Other hard drives, unfortunately, may not be so lucky. This is a hard drive for an older IBM laptop, I think a 486. It's 344 megabytes in size. Unfortunately, it may have a problem with the drive's, the disk drive interface logic. And this means that this drive may not be recognized or not operational at all. It's a disappointment because the drive itself may be highly reliable. Unfortunately, when something goes wrong at the logical level, at least for my capabilities and for other enthusiasts, it's quite difficult to make them operational again. So it's quite difficult to have a solution that works with all of them. In general, a hard disk drive that doesn't look to have PCB or a circuit board that is having a different color, or one that has signs of corrosion and other challenges brought by the elements, generally has a good chance of surviving, because most electronic components on the board side, if they have not been damaged by water condensation or long time storage in poor weather, in general they have a very high reliability, so they don't have problems. Also, when you're looking at a hard drive, it's important to check if there are any bends on the top surface. Some bends may be acceptable, but if the bend is just too steep, there may be an issue with the drive's integrity. You have to understand the fact that inside the disk drive, there are parts that have to be working very well, and this is quite a complex electromechanical device. So tolerances have to be kept quite tight. This is one of the major reasons why you don't have too many options when trying to service this drive. And although there are methods that have better performance or better success rate, you have to understand that with all technology, it's quite difficult to ensure the fact that you have anything more than the present chance of seeing the drive operating. Because most of the time with these drives, they are already old. The surface has been kept in unknown conditions for tens of years already. So this means that it may not operate as expected. Any bearing that has been looped before may have grease that starts to degrade, and this is particularly an issue with very old disk drives, because chemical formulations for oils have not been as well maintained as for newer technology. However, the serviceability of all the disk drives may be slightly better than modern ones, because tolerances are much easier to abide to in service with older disk drives. Modern disk drives have much tighter tolerances, and this means that every time you're going to modify something on the platters assembly or anything else, it's already highly risky and it may go wrong. One of the aspects I would like to cover is the fact that most of the time when you are trying to repair these drives, you should attempt to have minimal interventions or no intervention at all, and I would like to recommend that no intervention at all to the head assembly, to the platters or anything else. And you have to keep the environment clean, because dust can really damage hard disk drive very quickly. So you have to keep these aspects in mind when you are attempting repair. So try to be minimal and understand what happens. The moment you notice the fact that the drive has seek error sounds, like staccato of trying to constantly read a part of the disk normally, so after the initial power on, it's much more difficult to handle. In that case, it may be the fact that the magnetic surface is already damaged, or the heads do not have the same performance as before. There are many things that could go wrong, or the geometry of the disk cannot be read successfully. So there are many things that can go wrong, but in general, you have to avoid trying to hope for a solution and make things worse. You may understand some things that can go wrong, but in general, except in circumstances when you know very well what you're doing, I strongly recommend against trying to repair those drives. As a learning experience, and if you have some these drives, you may dispose of if something goes wrong. Yes, you may understand much more about them if you tear them down and try to see what happens inside. On the other hand, it's very difficult to do successful repairs. And in general, hard disk drive repairs are better left to highly skilled technicians, either ones that are already working in this branch, or for the ones that are interested in entering it. So it's quite a difficult area, but you have to take this into account. Another aspect you should be aware of is that older disk drives are generally much thicker than modern ones. This capacity has been steadily improving, and requirements of laptop manufacturers to have lighter and lighter devices ended up making a strong case for thinner disk drives. So modern ones are tending towards the same 2.5-inch format, but they are having a much smaller height. And if you look closely, you will notice clearly that the difference is quite serious. So you have to take into account the fact that the smaller a disk drive is, the more difficult it's going to be to successfully service it, because just about any mistake when trying to take apart the top cover or attempting to unstick the head assembly may end up in non-working drive. So you have to take this into consideration. Also, another aspect is that modern disk drives, or more modern disk drives, ones that are being built close to 2000s, have higher densities. And this means that any sort of damage that happens on the disk drive surface will be, on the platter surface, will be amplified. And in general, I think that these are much more common than failures such as the ones I mentioned before, with heads that stick to, or the actuator that sticks in the parking position. So the failure mode may be different. In general, a good rule of thumb when you are trying to assess the current situation of the disk drive is to run ScanDisk, or another program that makes disk surface checks, and see how well, how many bad sectors are found. It's not necessarily the fact that if you find more bad sectors, the disk drive is failing quicker than in the case of one that doesn't have bad sectors. Bad sectors are areas where the information cannot be reliably saved and then read. And this is the most common way of disks that fail gradually, because the surface is not going to maintain the proper magnetic charge, and this means that all the data that is being stored is not going to be stored reliably. When hard disks develop bad sectors, they tend to be clustered, or more or less around the same area, and that area may expand as the drive grows older. And in extreme cases, there may be so many bad sectors that you ultimately have to discard the disk. So you have to keep this into account. and both more modern and older hard disk drives are still at risk of developing bad sectors. Of course, if you are having strong magnetic fields, bad sectors of the disk surface is going to be affected much more. So always keep in mind to store these drives in the proper position. But I made this long expose of these drives because it's the first thing you may notice as failing in a laptop, the fact that it cannot start and you cannot install an operating system just because this drive is dead or doesn't work properly. And you have to take into account the fact that these drives rarely can be swapped between different laptops. If they are from roughly the same generation, it's quite possible, but if they are from different generations, it's going to be difficult. This hard disk drive has been manufactured in 1998. This hard disk drive has been manufactured in, I think, 97. If you look closely, you're going to notice that even, but not particularly in this situation, their thickness is different. So they may not be able to be placed on the same hard disk tray, if you want to say it like that. You notice that also, even if the holes are roughly in the same position, you still cannot swap one disk for another, even if their thickness may be accommodated in the laptop. So those are some of the issues. And with older hard disk drives, it's even worse because older hard disk drives have different hole positions, and this means that the whole assembly is different. And you can see how this drive that was probably manufactured in 1994 or 1995 and one in 1997, you have very little chance of swapping those drives. As you can see, the whole placement is wholly different. So you have to keep this in mind when you're starting your first attempts at trying to solve hard disk drive issues. And I think that this is highly important. The next part you may notice, well, the screen may be broken. In general, with broken screens, for laptops, you have two ways to attempt to solve the issue. Either you will have to accept the fact that using the video output of the laptop is the only solution, and this is the cheapest way to cope with such an issue. Or you may attempt to replace the display, or to replace a part that fails inside and makes it impossible for the display to show an accurate picture. So you're either not going to see any picture at all, or you're going to see one that is overly dull. So when you're seeing an image that a picture that should be white and it looks yellow, it's due to the fact that a part inside the display is failing, most likely the lamp. And although you may think that, oh, lamps should be found easily, unfortunately you need a particularly sized lamp, a particular diameter and a particular length that should also fit in the display. And if the lamp is significantly shorter, it means that your display is not going to be lit evenly. So it's only going to be lit up until closer. It's going to be lit only closer to the lamp's ends. But this means that part of the screen may not be lit properly, or if the lamp is skewed and it's not placed precisely in the same position, you're not going to end up with a screen that has uniform brightness. And another aspect that you may notice is the fact that sometimes even having a thinner lamp, which obviously means a newer one, changes the light distribution pattern, which means that you may have a screen that doesn't have the same uniformity because the light doesn't spread the same. And you have to take all these into account. So this is why many times you have to accept the fact that if the display is not working properly or not working at all, you may have to use an external output and plug your laptop to an external monitor or display. And this is what you have to contend with. Unfortunately, you cannot do much about this. You have to accept the fact that it fails, and it does so with very little chance of having a successful repair. And from my attempts, I can clearly say that repairing a screen is not a given. It may work, but only if you have the compatible parts, and this is an issue. I would like to present another aspect that should be noticed and taken into account. Even if when you look at this laptop, you may notice that it has a screen that can be measured. Unfortunately, even if you find a screen that has the exact same dimensions, you may be surprised to find out that the screen may not be compatible, because different screens from different manufacturers have particular ways of communicating with the graphics adapter. And if the signals are not sent as the screen requires, you are not going to be able to see any image at all, or the image is going to be scrambled. And this means that finding a successful replacement for a screen is very difficult. And in general, screens only from the same manufacturer, from the same model, can be swapped between models. So this is another issue you may contend with. I have set aside another common occurrence that you should be aware of when looking at all laptops. The fact is that sometimes these laptops do have problems with the power supply board or with something on the logic board inside. And this means extensive repairs are required. From my perspective, as far as I have made attempts at repairing laptops, it's quite difficult to just use the known saying of replace capacitors. Even if you do replace capacitors and some issues seem to be partially solved, most likely you're not going to be able to have a laptop that was previously not working again. And in general, problems with instability are very difficult to handle, because sometimes there may be components that are failing due to heat, and they have this instability when they are heated too much. And it's very difficult to understand which component gets warm and which one actually creates the issue. So if you are not well aware of particular models and particular failure modes, it's very difficult to make them operational, or at least fully working and stable. So you have to accept the fact that some laptops may not be safe. I showed to you this particular model because this one is one of the models that I have had very much difficulty in repairing, and it's the main reason it was not featured on this channel before. It's a compact LTE 5200. It's a model that was released probably around 1996. It's an old model. Unfortunately, the main issue with it is the fact that it's not working stably. And surprisingly, when it warms a bit, it's totally unusable, because it gets into a restart cycle that cannot be controlled in any way. And it's not a memory, it's not capacitors. Even if you are trying to replace some capacitors, it doesn't have any sort of influence. It's not the voltage that may dip suddenly it's something that goes bad on the main board. It could even be about the integrated memory, because this laptop also has memory that is soldered on the board. And when such a situation happens, it's very difficult to have a different testing scenario that gets to the bottom of the culprit. So you may be finding particular laptops to be very difficult to repair. And even if you may enjoy seeing them, you have to accept the fact that they may not be saved easily. I'm pretty sure there are experienced technicians that are having the right tools and the right knowledge to repair and make stable just about any model. But unfortunately, most of us cannot do that, even if we make strong attempts. So that is an issue you have to contend with. And also, in the end, when you're seeing so many things that could go right and wrong, sometimes it's the keyboard or the pointing device that may go bad, and this may create another issue. It's not in the case of this particular model, but sometimes you may find keyboards that are not working due to the fact that the internal connector between the keyboard and the main board is not working because it was broken, because it happened that water got into it and damaged something on the board, just about anything else. You are going to spot easily if a board has been subjected to water, because on the inside there are telltale signs like green residue that forms in areas that are closer to the surface or closer to the underside of certain boards. These are telltale signs. And also the fact that sometimes the area near a battery may also go bad. And a leaking battery can corrode the circuit and create serious problems. So you have to understand the fact that sometimes there is very little you can do in order to make a successful repair of a laptop, even if you may enjoy the model and if it seems too good to have a problem that cannot be solved. Unfortunately, that is the situation. And I'm pretty sure that as time will pass, it's going to be even more difficult to service older laptops, because except or comparing it to desktop computers, you have even less chance of replacing various parts and testing various possibilities. Laptops are mostly one-off device. So one that was manufactured, even if it was the series manufactured, the fact that it has so many components that were custom made means that replacing them or checking them, it's very difficult. The second issue is that very few schematics have been released on the internet. And the schematic is obviously the most simple way of trying to repair a device, because you already understand how it works and what you should be looking for. Of course, there are some persons that are highly skilled and can work without a schematic, but for most of us, the schematic is the first issue. Then we have to have a particular understanding of knowledge of various devices and try to have an attempt at repairing. But this is not going to be easy, and I wanted to present to you all these challenges that can happen. And sometimes another issue can be related to the plastic. The plastic can have micro cracks, which are very difficult to see because they are like a hairline. Crack that can develop and can affect the area around the hinges or the display assembly, and this means that your laptop may be unusable just because the screen assembly cannot be easily made stiff again and the cover to work as intended. And sometimes there are laptops that do not have any sort of video output. In the case of this laptop, it does have, so that's not an issue. You can see over here clearly the serial output. This is the video output, but it clearly has it. So that's not an issue in this case. However, there may be laptops that do not have an analog video output or that have a different standard that requires particular adapters. So there are situations where you have a very limited chance of trying to make a laptop operational, even if it's mostly operational. If it's not working, then if it's not booting properly, then you already have an additional set of issues you have to contend with. And if it's not stable again, you are having a lot to go against. So there are many aspects that could go wrong. And unfortunately, many problems are not well documented on the internet. You can't just say, oh, I found this model and I want to know how reliable it is. Unfortunately, you cannot do that because it's highly unlikely that some passionate collectors have had enough of a particular model to have a sample of 2 or 3 of them and know what may go wrong. So it's very difficult to have a good assessment of what is a good model, what is a bad one, what is a highly likely failure mode, what you can do about it. So it's mostly like a roulette. It's a game that you have to understand and unfortunately cope with, as happens many times. So it's not an issue that you can have too much of a say in it. The smallest problem, and perhaps the one that may be off the radar for most persons, is about the power supply itself. Power supplies, as far as I can tell, very rarely go bad and are particularly the reason why a laptop doesn't operate. On the other hand, batteries can be, because certain batteries tend to go short or may not communicate properly with the device. And if they are having issues, they may put an additional load on the internal power supply, because even if you have an external power supply, there is an additional power supply in your laptop, and this one regulates the low voltages that are required for the board. So you have to understand the fact that when you are putting a battery, you're already increasing the load on these electronic parts that are already quite old. So it's better just to take out the battery, as you have seen some of the laptops being reviewed over here in other places, and work the laptop as is. In general, an unstable laptop is not going to be unstable because the battery is not working properly. And a battery that is not working properly will only have an issue of being unable to work with the laptop when there is no additional power supply. Other than that, very rarely it happens. And although you may see some hacks like connecting power supply directly to the header of the battery and trying to run it like that, I have noticed very few chances of having a success. If the power supply is working, there are very little chances that something, a particular path, may lead to instability. So in most cases, if you plug the laptop to the power supply, or if you're using and you are supplying the required voltage on the battery connector, it's going to be the same result. Also, I would like to make an additional note regarding laptops that have an integrated power supply and ones that don't. In general, it's better not to have an integrated power supply, because if something goes wrong, you have a much better chance of finding a replacement. You just need to make sure that you are using the same power supply connector with the same diameter and the same roughly the same voltage, because there is obviously some leeway in that. You don't have to supply precisely the same full voltage. Many times it's better to go a bit lower with 1 volt, and in general most laptops operate with 1 volt less than they state. Sometimes they operate even at lower voltages, so you may find power supplies that work successfully with more laptops than you may consider, even if you read the label and you notice that it says 18 volts DC maximum. Well, it operates with a 16 volt power supply with no problem. And I'm pretty sure you can start a laptop even with a 15 volt power supply if the power supply has the right current rating. So these are aspects that you may find useful. And in general, with memory, you have to understand that there are chances that laptops may not have enough memory, or you may not find replacement memory. Finding replacement memory is particularly difficult because you may find laptops that are using a proprietary memory module. And this laptop, for instance, this compact laptop is such a situation. It has a proprietary model of module of RAM that has to be placed inside in order to increase the capacity. And this particular memory module cannot be used on other laptops. So even older or more recent laptops cannot be using the same memory module, even if electrically it may be the same. The fact that it's packaged in this particular way means that you cannot you cannot operate it successfully on another laptop. So these are all aspects that you have to consider. And in the case of hard drives, I noticed that you may not find replacements. And for other disk drives, such as is the case for removable ones, whether they are CD-ROM, DVD-ROM, DVD writers, or floppy disk drives, very rarely you can find disk drives that can be placed in the same place. And while removing them is easy, and they may seem to have the same connector, not having the same size, not having the same layout, means that you very rarely have success in replacing a removable drive. So you have to take this into account. And many times, in order to have a successfully working laptop, you have to invest quite a lot of time, if not money, in servicing it. I left almost at the end issues with cooling, because most laptops do not have such an issue that is very difficult to solve, and particularly older laptops do not have any sort of fancy fan control, which means that you can easily replace the fan, even if it's one as small as this one, with a more modern one, and end up with a working device. Or if you provide adequate airflow, you may even make do without a fan, even if you, of course, you may slightly reduce the laptop's lifetime. So there are many aspects that you have to take into account. There are many challenges, of course. There is also the pleasure of ending up with a working device, one that tells a good story of how it was to work with such a model back in the day. But many times you don't know what happens. You cannot see quite well in pictures if this particular model may be suitable. You don't notice cracks or many other issues that happen with the case. You may not know or see reliably the condition of the display or of other parts that may be failing. And I think that the most likely failure, as presented at the beginning, is the one pertaining to hard drives. Fortunately, it's one that can be easily solved, either using other hard drives if you have a collection of them, or attempting solutions such as compact flash cards and IDE hard disk drive adapters that can fit very well in a laptop. And the reason is such a device, even with the adapter, will end up just taking around this surface area. So it's not going to be something that you will have difficulty in plugging even in a modern one. So for storage, I think you will find eventually with a lot of effort and involvement, you will find a solution that works reliably. Of course, you may need to have multiple compact flash cards. You may need to have adapters, USB adapters, so you can move data back and forth. You may need to have an additional laptop where you can easily make the necessary configuration so that you end up with a bootable device if the ones you are trying to use doesn't have a working removable drive and you cannot place a bootable CD in it, for instance, because this may happen. And sometimes the floppy disk drive has a belt and cannot be easily repaired, or has some other issue that makes it impossible to work. So you have to take these into account. But in general, storage issues are the easiest to solve. Of course, you have to set aside some money, but the important aspect is that it's solvable. With power supplies, you may go on a route that doesn't end up with any sort of meaningful result, and moreover, issues that require board level repair may be even more difficult to tackle. And the same may be for screens or displays. So the most simple issue may pertain to a failing disk drive, and the most difficult one may end up with a board that has to be repaired, but it's just too costly or too difficult to do so. So you have to take that into account and think about all the issues. So even if you start by thinking, oh, a laptop is cheap, in many ways it's a challenge that is quite difficult to handle, because there are so many things that can go wrong, and when they go wrong, you have very little chance of finding spare parts. And particularly spare parts have a chance of not being particularly working well. And if you try to look, I don't know, using keywords or service part numbers, you may end up wasting much more money trying to repair a laptop than finding one that already works and probably will do so reliably enough in the future. So again, it's a gamble, but that is the current situation. So in many ways, it's difficult to say what works the best. And of course, you have to take into account another aspect. There were models that were much more interesting, much more attractive to a particular audience. And even if the model itself may be highly unreliable, it still ends up with a large price. And this is entirely unfortunate, particularly for persons that want to understand what the hype was about, and seeing just some pictures is not going to be enough. But that is the current situation, and we have very little we can do about that. Further, since I mentioned the fact that there are some other videos I'm preparing, I think that I will also cover analog and digital multimeters as well, as I have done in the past. I have many models that are interesting, and some of them may be particularly attractive to you, because you may have a fondness for older or newer models, or you may find the features they offer as being highly interesting. And I'm going to present to you in future videos, of course, how they handle, what is the build quality, and what you can expect about them. But in general, multimeters are plentiful, and the technology has evolved enough that you will find devices with a very good capability, and not only that, devices that are highly suitable to your interests. So it's quite easy to find successful devices. I also would like to cover in the future aspects pertaining to good and bad soldering. Because if you are trying to make repairs or trying to make mods in just about any device, soldering ends up as being an important skill you have to master. And even if you may not be considering this to be a life important skill, I still think it's highly valuable, because even working with some devices or trying to make very small repairs are going to end up being highly important and highly successful if you have good soldering techniques and good results. And this is why I consider good soldering as being a major requirement for having a very good result in electronics, whether you are trying to make your own electronic devices or you're trying to repair others. And even for some simple activities where you have to prepare some cables for, I don't know, different connections, there are still situations where soldering is going to be helpful, and mastering it will matter. Of course, it's a skill that takes time to improve, but ultimately it's something that is entirely workable. And in the end, there are many other aspects that I think will be interesting to cover next. Of course, it will all depend on your feedback, because ultimately, even if I want to make some particularly interesting videos, if the feedback is going to be lacking, I am not going to invest as much effort into them. Of course, I still have videos and subjects that I would like to cover, but ones that fare particularly poorly, and if they require a lot of energy and a lot of ideas and care to do, will probably not be as attractive anymore. But I have many that will continue to do so in the future, and I may revisit some aspects that I have previously presented, because they may be offering a new insight, or there are things that I would like to add more to what I previously said. So ultimately, there are many aspects that have to be taken into consideration, and I still think that there are a lot that can be discussed, but ultimately it will depend a lot on what is your perspective. I would have enjoyed to have your opinions, to receive questions from you, and having a chat, since 100 videos is a milestone. It's not a large milestone, but it's one of the first milestones I will be sharing on this chat. So I still hope that future videos and future interactions will be possible and will be pleasant to you. It may be due to the time, it may be due to the fact that I have not promoted enough this live stream, but I still think that in the future it may be interesting to some of you, to get to know you, to have a good way of offering feedback, and of course thanking you for your support, or whether it's just words or material support you are going to offer. So I think this is going to be highly important, even if for the moment, unfortunately, we haven't had the chance of exchanging ideas. However, I think in the future it's still going to be an open possibility. I am interested in finding your opinion, so leave comments. I will see them. If possible, I will make replies when I have something to share. But most comments, at least when they are not overcrowding a particular subject, will be seen. So they are appreciated, and they will be important for the long run. So I hope you will find the channel interesting. There are many things that I would like to present to you in the future. I hope you will find it useful, and if you do so, I still have a lot to share, and many of the things I have presented today will be part of future videos. And the subjects are still going to be varied. I will also cover older and newer technology, although there is a slight interest in the older one, because there are many aspects that you may find surprising when you take this look back in time, and when you consider what happened recently. However, there are many technologies that or products that are developing in an interesting moment and in an interesting way. And if I will be able to have a good assessment regarding them, and I think they will be relevant, I will present them to you in future videos. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy the stream, I would like to have your comments over there, and if there is a stronger interest, I may consider to do another one. However, for the moment, I will focus on creating more videos for the products and technologies that I think will be interesting for you to see. So thank you very much for watching, and have a pleasant evening.